Hi there. This is Joe Meadows, and welcome to Safety Leaders Now, the show where we cut through the noise and identify the strategies and tactics that today's top safety leaders use to keep their teams safe. On today's episode, we have Bill Cobb. I always enjoy catching up with Bill. I've known him for a little while now, and I think he has some great takes on kind of no-nonsense, straightforward safety. With that, Bill was actually the very first episode that we recorded, so the format probably leaves a little bit to be desired, but I just want to put a huge shout out to Bill for being so accommodating. And ultimately, I think it was still a great conversation, despite my inexperience. I think you're really going to enjoy the episode. We talk about a ton of things, but again, I think it was really awesome. And I think Bill really carried things here. So with that, let's get started. Okay, Bill, what's your current role?
So I'm currently the vice president of HSE and training with National Trench Safety, which is it's kind of the largest pure play trench safety companies in the U.S.
Okay, and maybe just to clarify for me, what does that mean? Can you give me an example of a trench safety project?
Sure. So out on a lot of construction sites, whether they're doing some type of drainage system or different types of piping or manholes, they have to come onto the job site and do an excavation. And so what we do is we try and help people not dig graves, but actually dig an excavation. So we provide all of the shoring equipment to kind of hold Mother Earth back to keep it from collapsing into the excavation onto a worker.
Okay. Makes sense. And can you just give me a insight into what's the size of the organization?
So we currently have approximately 70 locations across the U.S. We are actually a private equity owned company, and it's kind of been pieced together from a bunch of smaller regional players into this kind of national footprint. And we kind of cover the West Coast and the Gulf area and the East Coast, kind of up through Chicago, pretty well.
Okay. And can you just how long have you been there? I think, or I know you well enough to know that you're relatively new in the role.
So I actually came into the company mid-September of last year. We put the two big pieces of the company together in kind of Q2 of last year. And then I came in at the end of Q3 kind of to help stitch this together and kind of create a cohesive HSE and training organization, to just build the right foundation going forward.
And I guess with that, just take a step back and kind of say, okay, you're relatively new in the role. The company itself is a relatively new entity in the world. How would you articulate the current safety strategy in the company? And I guess less so in kind of PR speak, but if you were talking to somebody on your team today, how would you explain where you are today versus where you were in the past?
So, in the past, I've been with kind of large publicly traded companies. And so I've come into this role and it's fairly interesting. Generally, people and all of our team members included, they get it. They understand the reason to work safe. It's their finger that gets smashed or their arm that gets broken. But, across every organization, there's levels of kind of safety sophistication, if you want to call it that. And I would say that the maturity of the understanding of the pure value of safety as a function and business enabler is probably low. And it's an interesting dynamic that that we as safety practitioners face every day. And one of those is we all know that we've got to go build relationships and we've got to go sell the value of our programs and the processes and whatever it may be. But I did have kind of an epiphany after you and I talked a little bit yesterday. And what that was is, if you view this as a dating relationship, I'm not only trying to sell myself, so I get a second and third date and hopefully we go get married or whatever. but I'm having to overcome all the sins of boyfriends of the past. And as a safety practitioner, we have to overcome all of the sins of those that came before us. And if you're working in an organization that had the proverbial safety cop, or had the guy that was missing two knuckles on a finger became the safety person, and they didn't understand that true value proposition, that customers care about this, and it's a business enabler, and all of the magic buzzword speak that we all use. You're trying to overcome all the bad experiences that your new girlfriend had as you're trying to do this. And it makes it ever more challenging. The longer organizations are there. And if you look at the generation of leaders in companies today, think about the safety people that they encountered when they were supervisors or first-time managers. And now these are like the vice presidents and executives of companies. And unless they worked with somebody who really got it at a business level, and you're trying to, it's an uphill fight every day to just get everybody to buy in because of their previous bad experiences.
Yeah, I talk about this in it's kind of there is a ton of appetite for things in safety to be better, but you're always balancing that appetite against apprehension. That there's a huge amount of people who have just said, no way. Every time safety's had a new initiative every 4 months for my entire career, and every one of them has been a waste of my time. So I think overcoming that is always a challenge. So
it is.
Earlier, you talked about those people who haven't understood the business value. What do you think are the things that those other safety professionals didn't understand, and how did that undermine that relationship with these people today?
I think, I think it'd be unfair to categorize them as they didn't understand. What we've all chosen to do for a living and work in this safety space, it has evolved over time. And I think that what you had was a group of people generationally that their big focus on safety was compliance and checklists. And it was coming in and playing, I got you. I found that you're not doing these 3 things right. Have them fixed by the next time I come back, or else. And it became, everybody started playing the game that we all played when we were 5, when the safety guy showed up. And that game is, I'm invisible, I'm invisible, I'm invisible. They'd go hide. They go hide from the safety person. So we weren't getting a true reflection of what daily work looked like. And so everything was based on 1910, 1926. Could we go in and, check boxes? And if you didn't check a box, you failed. If you checked it, you were great, but you really weren't. You just did it that day. And so I think what they got wrong was that safety was a standalone event, right? Like it was an audit, it was an inspection, it was a 10-minute meeting before we went to work, as opposed to it was embedded through the organization. And those are easy words to say and really hard to make happen. I used to, when I was in manufacturing, I would say, we don't do safety any more than we do quality, right? Like quality is not a 10-minute inspection at the end of the process. Quality is built in throughout. And that's kind of what we're all trying to get there. That safety's that, a thread woven through everything. I just think the previous, the people who were the pioneers, if you will, in this space, they didn't have all these years of knowledge, experience, and evolution. So I don't want to grade them with today's knowledge and information. I think that's unfair. But I do think it's important that we all acknowledge what we're trying to overcome.
I think it's sort of troughs and hills and troughs of the evolution here, in that we needed to separate these functions in order to centralize enough resources and focus to build any sort of momentum. But now that we've broken everything up into silos, it almost highlights how or just how disconnected it is, and how silly that can actually be in practice. So to your point around quality, I mean, I think that they're not only similar in their approach, but I think, quality is fundamentally a risk mitigation technique in the exact same way that safety, in a workplace or environmental sense, is a risk mitigation technique. And I think the same thing could go, you could extrapolate that same thinking into saying a work order is a risk mitigation technique, because it would be pretty risky if we just put a bunch of employees in a facility and never told them what to do. They'd waste a lot of our money, and that'd be a big risk to the business. So I couldn't agree with you more there. So I guess with that, you're talking a little bit about business value and that you have to change people's relationship with safety. I won't double down on your dating analogy, but you have to change the way that people think about the function and what you're there to do and how you're trying to achieve it. So for us, this podcast is called Safety Leaders Now. And for me, coming from my background on ships, I think leadership is something that we focus on a lot. I know for yourself, you have a military background where people care a lot about what leadership is and what it means. And in this case, I mean, what I'd be curious about is if you're trying to change this paradigm of how the people at this organization think about safety, because they're coming from various backgrounds, is there a way that you would distill down what it is you're actually trying to do going forward? Understanding that people have a little bit of baggage coming into that conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's that's the $64,000 question. And I'm a firm believer in leadership wins every game. There's an old analogy, not analogy. There's an old story that General Colin Powell used to tell, that if you took tankers that shot live fire versus shot live fire in simulation or shot pure simulation, that's how they trained when they went out to actually qualify who would do better, right? Because it costs a lot of money to shoot a tank round. Well, what they found is it didn't matter. The organization with the best leader qualified the best, because the leaders used the resources available to them to achieve the desired result. I think one of the big challenges that every for-profit organization has is the biggest measuring stick is the profitability. It's the revenue coming in, it's the cost control measures, it's all of that. And I think as safety leaders, I used to go talk to college kids in safety courses, and one of the things I would tell them is, don't double major in safety and environmental. Major in safety and double minor in environmental and business. Because if you can't speak the language of business, if you don't know what the metrics are that are driving the organization, then you're going to swing and miss. Because the leaders at any level are chasing the things that the leaders above them hold important. And so safety is this really bizarre, function, if you will, because it's a bottoms up and top down strategy. And I'm not telling your listeners anything they don't know, because, the boots on the ground, it's their digits, it's their fingers and their feet and all of that are truly injured. But it's got to be an important value metric from the top down, because if you've got an executive that is talking about that, hey, we start every meeting with safety and, safety, blah, blah, blah. And then immediately we go into, but you got to get this done and go do this and go do that. You've basically defeated the message. And one of the things that I really try and get leaders to do is I want you to end your meeting with safety. Don't start it. I want the group that walks out, the last thing they hear is that we value them and that they're empowered to stop work and those types of things. But one of the big issues is getting that senior leader buy-in. And it goes back to how were they brought up? And I would tell you that I'm very blessed, working here at National Trend Safety, that our CEO, former oil and gas services guy, he really gets safety. And it was quite refreshing. We were talking the other day about kind of safety performance and metrics and how are we going to do things. And it's really easy for corporate functions and corporate headquarters to say, well, but we'll help them with that. And he basically stopped the meeting and he's like, no, that's their job. They're responsible. And if they can't do it, then we need to train them. We need to skill them up or skill them out. And it wasn't like, let's go throw everybody away, but it was like, that's a component of their of their job, and they've got to be good at it. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but it really comes down to that the leader is responsible for it all. And the way that I try and connect that is, as a leader, sure, your job is profitability, but it's also people and process. And you have to clearly, consistently show care and concern. And safety is an easy way for you to do that, by just appealing to that human empathy of, hey, I care about you, Joe. I want you to put your safety glasses on, so you can hold your daughter's hand, or you can throw a baseball with your kid, or whatever. So I think it is connecting that safety. And I've been saying this for years, safety is an action, not a metric. We've got to quit just measuring safety, and we got to do more safety. And it's not slogans, it's not logos, it's not be safe, zero, think safety, do this, do that. It's, what are you going to do about it?
But I think that goes back to the, I think one of the things that I'm super passionate about is that, safety has often gotten to a place where it, like you said, it's all slogans and logos and, a fluffy talk, or we're committed to safety because we start every meeting with safety and we put a lot of posters on the walls. And one of the things that I'm personally super passionate about is getting us to a place where we're doing a little bit more to measure. We talked about this a little bit in our little pre-recording call, but, measuring more of what matters. And I think that, you mentioned that it's not all about metrics. Do you think there's any metrics that companies get too focused on that create this kind of disconnect between, let's say, the operational leadership and safety leadership? What are those metrics that safety people get too fixated on that actually pull them away from the rest of the business?
It's heresy, but, and most people will probably agree, though. I think that the over focus on TRIR is a big issue, because you can do a lot of damage to people and not have it be a recordable. And if your big focus is on it not being a recordable, I think it drives organizations to tell people to go use their personal health insurance, drives people to not report things and claim that they fell at home or whatever, because there's this big push about, we haven't had a recordable in 1.5 million man hours. And everybody's like, well, it ain't going to be me. Right. Because I'm not the guy that's going to break the streak. And so I think this over indexing to it, I'm actually working with a colleague and we're kind of drafting up some words that we'll go put somewhere, about the safety practitioner spends so much time managing the recordability of an injury. And it's all about finding, gray area in the record keeping guidelines, or, whatever it may be, that, by the time we get through the end of this, we're just mentally exhausted. And the same effort is not put into really trying to find what happened and how do we fix it and go put the preventative measures in place. I think we spend so much time kind of just trying to manage the recordability of an incident. And I think it also impacts the entire industry, right? I mean, I'm in the US, so I'm very US centric, but one of the reasons that OSHA wanted recordable injuries reported is so they could determine where there was a significant trend towards injuries in a particular industry or a particular activity or whatever. And as practitioners, if all we do is try and manage the recordability away, I don't know that we're giving a true representation of what's going on in the world. But the problem that I find is, having been in oil and gas and manufacturing and working with refineries and things, that's their metric. And so now you've got all of this ISNet and Avetta and Browse and Peck and all of that, where you have to put your stuff in. And if you don't hit a magic TRIR number, you can't go to prom, right? You don't get invited. And so there is a business need to manage TRIR, but it's impacting us all in this, in this profession.
Well, so well, we both know, we've spoken enough to know that we're on the same page with this stuff, but I'm curious, do you think that this is my personal opinion here is that TRIR itself is not bad. It's the over leveraging of TRIR in a world where there's no context. And so if we were to look at, we were talking about, measure what counts, or you'll count what you measure. And I think that's the issue here, is that we have so little to go on that the only thing we measure is TRIR. So we end up doing this kind of, or there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in the way we look backwards and trying to say, there's a lot of safety professionals who, again, might feel strongly about what I say here, but basically, despite all of the highfalutin language and huge commitments, a huge part of the job is you're like you're cooking the books to a certain degree, or you're thinking about a way to redefine something that happened in a way that's not focused on performance, but instead is focused on, we've landed in some gray area here, so we're gonna fall off. I think. Do you agree with that? Do you think I'm missing the mark here? Do you think there's anything else we could be measuring that would be driving us more towards performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of things, but as Edison says, it's missed because it shows up in overalls and looks like work. Because it takes a lot of heavy lifting, and when you just look at like an incident frequency rate, I think that's a more important measure. Like, how often is something happening, whether it's a near miss or whatever. When you start looking at, I think incident severity, I think the DARTs and the lost time case rates and all of that, I think those are better measures as well. Anytime an organization like OSHA writes a rule, I mean, it's going to be written at such a macro level, right? But if I go back in the annals of my career progression, surgical super glue wasn't a recordable, but now it is. But a steri-strip's not. But one stitch is. But it could have been closed with a steri. And you start getting into this kind of splitting hairs game. But I think that if we were, if we drove this to this level of sophistication, I think just talking to people and looking at the effectiveness of training, if we had, an incident frequency rate of whatever every time we use this machine, and we put in some type of training, an administrative control or an engineering control, and that the frequency of incidents went down, not due to underreporting, but true. I mean, that's the kind of stuff we ought to be measuring, but that gets ooey gooey and ethereal and all of that. But I've actually asked some people that, are a lot smarter than me, some of the academics in this profession. I'd like to see somebody go do a case study to figure out where HR got it right, and safety kind of is still missing the mark a little bit. HR in every company I've been in, if you're sitting in a room with operational leaders and HR says, hey, we have to do this, everybody's like, oh, we better do it because it's, XYZ is going to happen. If the safety practitioner says, hey, you know what, we really need to do this, they're all like, no, listen, we know how the business works and we know this, right? And so it's like everybody knows what we do. You think about if somebody's watching pro sports, they're like, oh, why'd that guy throw that ball like that? Well, I don't know, dude. You're sitting in your recliner and that guy's got, 400 pounders running at him. There is some situational presence that you have to have, but HR figured this out years ago. Look at organizations, Joe. There's a lot of big companies have chief HR officers. How many companies have chief safety officers? Not nearly as many. So
part of that is, I know there's I think it's from Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee or something, but I think Jerry Seinfeld had a line that part of the reasons comedians get so much, criticism is that everybody's made their friends laugh. And so it gives you a certain degree of credence to say, I can tell you how to do what you do. And I think with safety, everybody's worn safety glasses. Everybody's had a meeting with their team to say, be careful today. And it creates that opportunity to maybe be a little bit more of a critic and undermine what's going on a little bit.
I think that's exactly right. I think they understand. I had a safety person tell me one time, that's not a trip hazard because it's not over 3/4 of an inch tall. And I'm like, isn't it a trip hazard if you can trip on it? I mean, so everybody has read something or heard something or, made their friend laugh. And so therefore they think they're a comedian. Everybody's read something and now all of a sudden they think they're an expert. And I can tell you that, I've got a weird career background in the fact of I've had varying safety jobs, but I've also had operational leadership assignments in corporate America. An expert on anything. And I think one of the things that the safety, people need to do is slow down a little bit, right? Don't just spout an answer, because the reality is once you spout it, it just got spoken into truth, and people will bastardize what you said. And look, if it's life threatening, I think we all recognize it. The guy's dangling off of a ladder, the guy's, using a meat cleaver, doing whatever. I think we can all go, hey, let's stop. But before we start giving some type of technical answer, let's go take a minute. I mean, it's all available on the World Wide Web. Go do a little research and come back with a fact as opposed to anecdote.
Do you think that it's a sophistication issue though? Like, if we go back to your comment about HR, is that I think, as we said, safety so often operates in platitudes and toolbox talks and discussions of things like that. Do you think that there's a failure to not institute metrics to measure other people, but to do a little bit more to measure ourselves?
Oh, I personally think that, I was talking to a colleague that's in a global company and, somebody put a program in place, a safety program, and it's not working. So they put in another assessment to validate the first one, and it's still not working. So they put in a third assessment to validate the second assessment to validate the first program. And I don't think we stop long enough to go evaluate what it is we're really doing, and is it driving to the level of effectiveness, that we want. Back to your kind of measures, there's the measures of performance, which is TRIR and that kind of stuff. And then there's measures of effectiveness. Is your program taking you where the organization wants it to go? And every organization's different. Some organizations are completely fine with a basic level of compliance, and that's okay. But as somebody that works in that, I don't today, but if somebody works in an organization like that, then accept it. Because if you go try and find the next shiny thing and be like, woo, shouldn't we do this? The organization doesn't have that appetite for it that you talked about. And, So as you kind of go through this whole process, it's such an interesting career field, that I think you can do whatever you want at most companies. I mean, sure, you're limited by resources and, money or whatever. But the reality is that you can really kind of go put together whatever program you want and sell it. But I think you got to slow down a little bit and what's your North Star? Where are you going? Like, what do you want it to be? In life, we're all temps, and especially at work, nobody's forever, no job's forever. I've said it since I started working that I'm a temp. My team's going to make me look great, and they're going to give me something else to do, or I'm going to screw it up and they're going to, promote me to customer. But one of the interesting components of this is, unless you stop and say, where do we want to go? What do we want this to be? I think you're always just kind of wandering in the wilderness.
Can you give me an example of something that you would see as a North Star for safety departments?
I can give you a kind of a macro. I've had for years, my idol when I look at safety programs, and I think it's the Maytag repairman, right? Everything works so well, you're just waiting on the phone to ring. And what my North Star always is to get to a point to where safety is understood and it's actioned, and ideas for improvement are coming from the people who use it. I think too often safety folks think their job is to create a safety program. And, I couldn't disagree with that philosophy more, because the reality is, if our job was to create a program, we could all sit down and type it all up and hit save and publish it on an intranet and declare victory. Our job is to keep people safe. How we do that is with tactics, techniques, procedures. To do those things, you have to go build a program that drives a level of education, a level of knowledge, and then the application. And then we do inspections and audits to manage the efficiency and effectiveness of said program. But the outcome is we're just trying to keep people safe, right? We're trying to keep people safe and protect the environment and the general public. So, to me, when you look at, like the North Star to me is that safety is viewed within the business, not viewed as part of the business. And a lot of this is ethereal, and I'm not trying to dodge the question, but I think every organization is different. Yeah. As I said earlier, you come into something, I worked for a company called Baker Hughes, which is a big global oil and gas services company, very sophisticated safety programs. They dealt with explosives and radioactive things and process safety and chemical manufacturing. So it's very sophisticated as an organization. But when you go down to somebody you just hire off the street, they're not very sophisticated potentially. And, you and I talked a little bit yesterday that as we, in the world today, there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on. And I think that too often what happens with especially safety is, you have two organizations, and organization one is at an 8, and organization 2 is at a 5. But all of a sudden, we just expect organization 2 to be an 8 just because we handed them a 3-ring binder. And all we do is walk around and whack people with sticks that they're not an 8 because we're trying to measure them the same way. I think we have to take our programming to a point to where we meet the team where they're at and then bring them with us, as opposed to drawing a line and saying, race to get there. Let me know what you need. So that's kind of my general overview.
So as it relates to meeting the team where they're at, and I'm glad you mentioned this sort of M&A component, because I did want to circle back there. But maybe before we drive into that, when you're talking about that and saying, hey, we need to understand where you are, so we can take you where we need to go together. Do you think that safety organizations generally talk to those frontline employees enough about rating their own performance?
No. I mean, that's the short answer. Kind of the fill in the blanks here is, I think that we go look at measures of performance. I think we go look at the TRIR and the MVAR and whatever, and we're not looking at those measures of effectiveness, which is go talk to people, talk to people and see how the program works.
How everybody spends, how many hours a month working on generating a new monthly report for the board, but how many organizations send out a monthly survey to say, how could safety do better this month? And which would have a bigger impact on the organization? I have a theory.
Well, I think I concur with your unspoken theory.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I think it's, anyway, pretty interesting stuff. So let's circle back to the M&A component here. We won't dive too much into that, because I think we may circle back to it here. So, as I understand it, where you are today, you're a conglomerate. PE came in, bought up a bunch of companies, and you're trying to create that single source for trench safety. Can you explain a little bit about how you're thinking about bringing some of those organizations together? And is there any kind of framework you've dove into to think about how to approach M&A from a safety perspective?
Yeah. So, the first thing that you do have to go look at is those measures of performance, because they're the ones that are readily available. And then I think you have to assess your team, right? I think you have to look at the people who are kind of quote unquote the safety function, and you have to look at them and look at what's their approach to it, those types of things. And then, you almost have to you have to reset the mindset. In some cases, other cases, you're like, wow, great, let's go. You got to do a little deprogramming sometimes, because they've been doing things a certain way and thought they were excellent. But, so we're looking at that, but then we're also going and assessing the leaders and kind of what's their buy-in to safety. And it's about open-ended questions, right? Because, being anti-safety is like being pro-cancer. You're never going to find anybody. So you have to, hey, what's your approach to safety? How do you think it fits into your business? What are the things you've done personally to improve it? What can the function do to help you, help your business be better? And it's asking those kind of open-ended questions. And then I would tell you that I think you have to, especially in an environment like I'm in, where all these companies came together, varying levels of safety, acumen, programming, whatever you want to call it. And I've basically boiled it down to, we're going to do less better. We're going to, we're going to go focus on those key components, right? That I think are what's going to set the right foundation. And as elementary as it sounds, it's standardizing PPE. It's trying to teach people how to find and fix hazards. It's getting leaders to place value on it. And I can tell you, everything that you need is all open source out there. I mean, those three components that I just talked to you about were the three components of the OSHA Safe and Sound program. And it talks about the, management, worker participation, find and fix hazards. And, to me, it's, let's take it down to the baseline, because I think safety people go to conferences and read books and listen to podcasts and all of that kind of stuff. And they walk away and they're like, I have a new bright idea. I'm going to go create something. But we don't spend enough time letting the concrete dry on the things we've already done and evaluating the effectiveness of it. So what happens is we get 27 programs out there and we're focusing on the newest 3, but the other 24 have gone stale. Nobody ever used them. And kind of it's almost like in the safety person's performance review, it's about, hey, did you get something new out there? You get to go say, hey, I launched this new initiative, and we handed out stickers and we had ice cream parties and whatever. And it's like, okay, swell.
I heard an interview with Elon Musk recently that speaks actually to this exact same point, wherein he was talking about government regulations more generally, not safety regulations, but he was in a different context talking about the fact that, they should set an amount of years on government regulations. And if at the time that time limit is reached, nobody advocates that the regulations stay around, it should be scrapped. And I think in safety, we have this perpetual expanding of the onion. We just add a layer and a layer and a layer.
Yep.
And I think it all comes back to what you said earlier, which is that being anti-safety is being like pro-cancer. And so I think in my opinion, one of the things that leaders are faced with is the fear of doing less in a world where, well, what happens if we get rid of this and then something happens? So can you speak a little bit to, when you try to rally your team around this idea of let's do less better and then build from there, how do you get leadership buy-in on kind of an approach like that?
So I do want to give credit to a great guy that kind of helped level set me in the safety world to this. And it was in my last role. And he was one of the region vice presidents that we had. And before I took over safety, one of the region safety guys was like, we're going to increase the required number of observations per employee. And to just make math simple for, because we're radio and not TV here, is, you're going to go from 1 to 2. And he stopped and he goes, hey, is everybody doing 1? Well, no. Then do you think they're going to do 2? And so the focus should have been on, let's get good at what we already said we were going to do, right? Now, to kind of address your question, I would tell you that when you want to do less better, I'm very fortunate. I went to our CEO and I said, this is what I want to do. And he's like, great, you're my safety guy. Go forth and do excellence. But I would tell you, if you don't have that support, if you take it to not necessarily kind of that first line manager, but if you take it to the next step up, and for us, that would be like a district manager. If you take it to the district manager and go, hey, listen, and I think we're asking these branch managers to do too much. I think we need to boil that down and let's just do like a handful of things and let's get great at them. They'll all buy in, because what you find in these kind of geographically dispersed organizations, and I would tell you that it's like extremely challenging when you have small populations in a lot of places, because you don't get any of that kind of economy of scale and that peer mass pressure. But it as you go start talking to these people about, we're going to do less so we can measure it and be great at 4 things, they all get it, because everybody, when you only have that branch manager at a location and maybe he's got between, he or she's got 4 people to 34 people, it all stops at them. Everybody else gets to olay it. Yeah, that's a great idea. Olay to the next level. But once it gets there, they got to do the work. And so I think if we can have our frontline leaders focus on less things, but focus on the things that are driving effectiveness, and really resource that, where the safety function is is pouring their time into 4 or 5 juvenile, and I say that, with respect, because as we're all talking about whatever, we're talking about SIF, and we're talking about, cultural excellence and all of that. And the guy on the ground is just like, what glove do I wear? And so we've got to quit trying to be ethereal academic, inventing some program so we can do some whiz bang thing, because really what we're measured on, whether we like to believe it or not, are those measures of performance. And the only way you get the performance is if we, as the safety people, focus on the measures of effectiveness. The measures of performance are the scoreboard, right? Whether you like Tom Brady or not, I don't care, pick your quarterback, but nobody gets in the huddle and says, touchdown on one, right? They have a play that they're going to run. Everybody knows their responsibility. There's a playbook that we all read and understand. We have a game plan that we're executing to. And that's what we, as the safety folks, should be doing. Is we need to build a playbook. We need to build the game plan. We need to practice with everybody through reinforcement, through on-site inspections and audits and whatever, and tracking the right metrics. And then those measures of performance are the scoreboard. They reflect how well we played the game. And instead, I think too many people are like, we need less recordable injuries. Okay, what would you like us to do about it? Be safe. Okay, thanks. Appreciate you. Can we go back to work now? So that's, to me, I think everybody embraces doing less. I mean, I think if everybody in your company, Joe, if you went to them and said, hey, I just want you to do one thing and I want you to do it amazingly well, they'd all kiss you on the forehead. It's just not the world we live in. But as the safety function, we get to control how much we put on them for them to do.
So to build on that a little bit, in this case where, I that all resonates with me pretty clearly. Can you expand a little bit on, if you've got this philosophy, let's do less, let's do it better. We want to give that team that, here's the playbook, here's the play we're going to run right now. What are those things that you've chosen to focus on in your current organization so that you can start to build that momentum?
So it's PPE. Like what is the basic PPE requirement? Where do you go buy it? If you're a branch manager, where do you source it to get it so you're getting the right cut level protection or whatever? And then it's an accountability metric, right? It's, hey, we rolled this out. We gave you 30 days. And now the reality is, as a leader, if you walk out and see Joe not wearing his safety glasses, it's not optional. We've all agreed that Joe gets a written warning. And but the other side of that is, if Joe's coworker sees Joe and says, hey, Joe, put your safety glasses on, there's no harm, no foul in that. You can submit an anonymous observation that, hey, we did that. Because now I'm trying to get coworkers to work together to protect each other from the man, right? Because if the branch manager goes out, they have to take action as the leader. So basic PPE. We run a lot of delivery trucks. So, hey, are we inspecting our trucks? Go out with a driver, inspect their truck. Go ride with a driver a couple times a month for a little bit. Make sure we're driving safe. Go look at a sales rep's pickup truck. Does it look like Pigpen, or do they keep their office neat and tidy? I mean, previous company, we had a sales rep, had a low speed rear end collision at an intersection because when he came up to stop and he hit the brakes, his coffee cup fell over and he went to pick it up and took his foot off the brake and rolled into the car in front of him. So why was his coffee cup sitting on the console? Because his cup holders were full of business cards and change. But as a leader, you should be out looking at those types of little things. Are we storing material appropriately? Are we inspecting a forklift? I mean, I'm talking absolute rote minimum standard things. But these are the things that, in the Army, you had bypass criteria, right? So like if you're at war and you're in a tank and there's two guys standing there, well, you drive past two guys, somebody else will police them up later. That's bypass criteria. And I think too often the basics of safety have become bypass criteria on the way to something shiny.
Yeah. And is there anything you're using right now in instituting this and saying, hey guys, we're gonna get back to basics. We're gonna, kind of elevate the overall kind of professionalism and rigor in the way that we do our day to day. Have you set any targets right now for, hey, once we start to see X, I'm going to move on to the next level? Or are you really just focused on executing this right now?
So I've got this year kind of mapped out. One of the things that previous job, I was talking to a branch manager and I'm walking around and, just as an example, I'm looking at a flammable cabinet. I'm like, hey, that's not right. Like you can't have things stored on top of it. The doors can't just hang open. You can't have combustible material in it, whatever. And he's just looking at me like I got four heads. and so we moved on and we looked at something else. And, we're looking at his bench grinder or whatever. And I'm like, you got to have guards, man. This thing can't be like angle grinding. You can't grind aluminum or whatever. And he's still looking at me like I have four heads. I'm like, do you even know what I'm talking about? He's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I said, okay, we're done. And we went back and we built what we call a facility guide. It's a picture book. It's all about visual management. Here is what a good flammable cabinet looks like. So now what we do is we assign that to an individual. They are responsible for the flammable cabinets. And the picture of what good looks like is on the wall next to it with Joe's name on it. So as a branch manager, when I walk out, all I have to do is look at the picture and look at the flammable cabinet. They don't look right. I see Joe's names and I'm like, oi, Joe, fix this. And now that makes it look like the leader really knows and they're dialed in. And it's not, I have a leadership philosophy and it's Sesame Street, right? One of these things doesn't look like the other. If you walk into a manufacturing environment, like my first real safety job was in a manufacturing environment. And I have a degree in safety, but I'm so old that I had forgotten everything because I hadn't done it in years. So I go in and I read all of our safety rules and I go start walking plants. And there was only like three things I knew. Right. Like I knew, what flammable cabinets ought to look like. And I knew about, slings and hoists and overhead cranes and all of that. I used to look at every nylon lifting sling at a manufacturing facility. And there was probably 400 of them. And these guys were all like, wow, this guy really digs deep. Nope. This guy only knew three things. So I'm going to play to my strengths. But I'd walk out and I'd see two people doing the same task. And one guy would have on nitrile gloves and another employee wouldn't have any on. And so anytime I saw things that didn't look alike, I'd just go ask, hey guys, just have a question for you. Why are you wearing gloves and you're not? Are you supposed to? Yeah, I'm supposed to have them on. Well, why don't you? This is all just absolutely simple things. And that's what we're just trying to get the leaders to do, right? And it's paying dividends. I mean, we are seeing a reduction in those measures of performance. But that's because we're over-indexing to these measures of effectiveness, visual management. Our company's big into 6S, and we're on the journey of 6S. And so we've paired safety in, as that 6S. And the visual management cues of the facility guide help support that. So, I mean, it's really about giving the frontline leader who is really, really busy because they're the butcher, baker, and candlestick maker of the organization. And they don't have a lot of people to delegate to. So we have to give them very simple things. If this, then that. If you walk through this door, then you must wear this PPE. If you have a flammable cabinet, then it should look like this. it's really that simple overall. I mean, I don't need a really complex process to do that.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome takeaway, because I think that's something, just that visual management component, being able to come in and give people, hey, this is how you're going to be successful, and having a certain degree of empathy, not just for their personal challenges and things like that, but as you said, that they're so busy and they're so used to safety coming in and saying, here's one more thing that might seem like a good idea on the face of it, but has, there's no empathy in the fact of saying, you're so busy, here's one more thing you have to do, even if it's a good idea. So
well, the same guy that talked to me about the 1 versus 2 observations talked about branch managers, and he said, everybody in the organization is tasking a branch manager, and their philosophy is, it's just one more thing, 5 more minutes. It's one more thing, 5 more minutes. And I mentioned it earlier that I have a fairly, kind of eclectic background, and my path here has been a bit of a gypsy. But I came out of the Army and I went into, I was in sales, but I've run manufacturing operations, whether it's manual assembly or machining. I've done, what they called operations support, where I ran aftermarket maintenance and competency and real estate. And because I haven't always lived in the safety space, I have actually been the one applying what people are pushing. My perspective comes from the end user as opposed to the shiny safety thing, right? And when I go, look, what I try and do with any team I have in safety is I try and get whatever the jargon is of the industry that we're in. And in the rental space, so National Trench Safety, we rent our trench boxes and road plates. But in the rental space, there's a lot of different metrics. There are things like time utilization and dollar utilization and fleet unavailable for rent and various other metrics. But what you find is the safety people have never learned the language of their business. And what I do, what I typically do is I go take all of the acronyms that the business speaks in, and it's a homework assignment to the safety team member. Go fill this out. Some of them have a safety component. If you go look at terms and conditions on a rental contract, well, there's indemnification clauses in it. There's, that the customer is responsible for X, Y, and Z. And what's the safety impact of terms and conditions? Well, if they don't do their inspections right and they do various things and an incident occurs, we have a level of lessened liability in this. And safety practitioners are thinking shall, will, and must more than they're thinking of the business that they operate in.
Yep. No, I think that and having that background, that's a trend that we see in successful safety leaders, is not universally, but there certainly is an over biasing towards people who have that business background or have worked in an operational capacity, because I think it gives you a little bit more sensitivity for not only, or there is a fundamental business reason why people invest in safety. It goes beyond the moral obligation, and there is a reasoning there that I think we need to be able to tap into if we want to drive performance and get backing for new projects and things we want to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, you come out of school and they've taught these young folks about, well, cost avoidance, and the typical hand injury costs $10,000, and if you'll go do this, that'll prevent that from happening. And you take that to, like somebody running a manufacturing plant with 1,000 people, and you're like, hey, we need to do this because and they're like, well, can you guarantee me that a hand injury won't happen? Well, no, but it'll save you $10,000. And it's like, we spend $10,000 in toner cartridges every month for our printers. Please move along. And so it is about understanding materiality to an organization, versus these things that are, what you don't want to do is go in as a safety person and try and convince leadership that they need to pole vault over a mouse turd, right? I mean, it's the hurdle rates for some of these things and the amount of time and energy and effort. It's that old, is the juice worth the squeeze? Now, that doesn't mean regulatory compliance or whatever, but that's like, hey, we should go do this new program, and just stop a little bit, right? Go find your North Star again. What are you trying to accomplish? And, I think in the world we're in today, I think more and more companies are trying to run as lean as they possibly can. In a perfect world, you have a one-to-one safety person to a facility, or one safety person to 30 people, or whatever your ratio is that you come up with. But that's not reality. That's not the world we live in. And so when you're running lean, you really have to embrace this whole DIY mentality, right? Like, it's not going to get done unless we do it. So we need to do it. And let's just go chop the wood that needs to be chopped. And I think it's often sad that, kind of to circle back about this kind of anti-safety versus pro-safety, is I think too often, to phrase it a little differently, right? You have, in the bell curve of life, you have these leaders who are very activist safety leaders in their company. Then you have these over here that are like, I don't really care, I just have to do it. And then you got all these people in the middle. And too often, to move people more towards that activist, safety leader, it takes a catastrophic event. And, the problem is the people involved in the catastrophic events are somebody's sons, daughters, husbands, wives, and their sacrifice isn't worth it for you to get with the program. And there's a speaker out there. His name's Greg Hawkes, and so I'm going to give him credit because he's the one that taught me this on the bell curve. That the easiest way to explain a bell curve to people is to think about that bell curve in your company like it's a neighborhood. You have owners, renters, and vandals. And the vandals you got to get rid of. The owners are the ones that plant flowers and cut their grass and decorate for Christmas and things like that. And the renters are the ones that aren't convinced that they really want to live in this neighborhood. They're there because it was a place to be. But our job as leaders, and everybody on the safety function is a leader, because if you don't have that direct, leadership role, you're certainly an influencer. You're an influential leader. And your job is to go around and be part of that welcome wagon and of that homeowners association and convince those people why they need to buy there, why they need to invest and be an owner, proverbial owner, in that neighborhood and in that company, because owners take less energy to take care of themselves and the things that need to be done. So I think it's important that our job is to go out. It's about people. This is a people job. And if you don't like people, then great, go be an academic. But if you like people, then you got to be willing to go talk to people, and you got to be willing for people to I don't know what words we're allowed to say on here, but you got to be willing for people to call bullshit on what you're doing. And you have to be calloused enough that you go, but why? Why do you think that? And to really ingest it and then go back and apply your own tools. We're real fast to go out and apply 5Y and Taproot and all this other stuff so we can pin the tail on a donkey over there. But we don't apply those same things to ourselves, right? Like, we don't go 5Y our program to say, why aren't we getting that effectiveness out of it?
Well, I think that is a perfect place to wrap this up. I think that's a good kind of spiking of the football on safety professionals, and I think applying some of these things back to what we do, because I think that's, again, I think the reason people get passionate about these things is we can see the way that drives performance and the way that this is going to make the rest of our organization great. And I think driving people to maybe look internally a little bit and get off the high horse and think, how could we also be doing better as a safety function is, I think, a pretty impactful place to leave things off. So with that, I just want to start wrapping things up. I've got maybe one final question before I let you go. And that is, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Who else should I have on the show? Is there anyone else in the safety community that you think might play well here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I can tell you the three guys that were true safety guys for me at the last company. I would put them up against anybody in this industry. I think they're all fantastic. There's a guy named Michael Hayden, a guy named John Phillips, and a guy named Ray Cormier. And those guys all, today or past lives have run big things. One of the things that I would recommend to you, Joe, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. As we talked about my background, I think you ought to talk to some non-safety people and get their take on what's going on. And, I'd pony up my CEO, Phil Mason, who's a great guy to do it. And I think those types of people can give all of us as safety leaders some things to really, kind of chew on a little bit about what they want from safety programs, because we really work, we work for the organization, and, we are a support function, and we need to remember that.
Well, I think that sounds like a great idea. I will do my best to follow up there and hold those guys' feet to the fire. And with that, I'll say thank you very much, Bill. It's been awesome having you. I'm sure there's a ton of value here that people are going to get, and can't wait for this episode to get out there. So thank you very much.
No, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that episode with myself and Bill Cobb. If you did enjoy it, I would encourage you to give us a review, a rating, let us know how we can improve. Additionally, if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'd love to get a DM from you, learn a little bit more about who's listening to us so that, again, we can understand the audience and improve from there. Love to hear what you liked and also what we could do better. As always, I want to put a huge shout out to Val for producing the podcast and to all of you for listening. Hope you have a great day, and I will catch you on the next one. Thank you very much.